One phone, one boat, one missing timeline, and one friend who eventually went public with his version of Nolan Wells' final hours. Warren Hudson says he did not abandon Nolan, but the more questions investigators ask, the harder it becomes to separate what is known from what is.
I believe almost in the Nolan family. I mean, the boys have given their phones over to the FBI voluntarily. And we still haven't gotten Nolan's phone from the family to the police.
For weeks, Warren Hudson has been at the center of a storm surrounding Nolan Wells' final hours. Hudson says Nolan was his best friend. He says the group did not simply leave Nolan behind on Horn Island. He says Nolan chose to remain there while the others dealt with a serious problem involving their boat. And he says Nolan's phone was left behind on that boat. But that explanation created another mystery. Why was Nolan's phone on the boat while Nolan was reportedly still on the island? What happened during the hours nobody can completely reconstruct? Could the phone answer some of those questions? Could the boat? Could the autopsy? And could the statements given by the people who were there finally be matched against something objective? Because tonight, we are not going to decide Warren Hudson's guilt from a viral clip. We are going to examine the moments that made people question his story in the first place. Warren Hudson did not become one of the most discussed names in the Nolan Wells case because police publicly announced that he was a suspect. He became central because he was there. He was one of Nolan's friends on the 4th of July trip to Horn Island. And when the questions became impossible to ignore, Warren began speaking publicly. In interviews, he described Nolan as a close friend, someone he considered like a brother. His version of the day is relatively simple. The island was crowded. Multiple boats were coming and going. People were swimming, socializing, and moving between groups, and according to Hudson, Nolan eventually chose to remain on the island rather than return with the group. That account has also been reported from Hudson's interview with Brandon Tatum. But there is a critical detail. Warren says the last time he personally saw Nolan was around 3 p.m. He says Nolan was with a girl, then Warren's attention shifted toward the boat, and after that point, Nolan's whereabouts became uncertain. That creates the first major question, not whether Warren looked emotional, not whether the internet believes him, but simply what happened after the last moment Warren says he personally saw Nolan.
Nancy, I think it's because people are out putting out misinformation and they don't have the totality of circumstances because they haven't heard from the boys, didn't watch the interview and all of this stuff, and they feel that it's convoluted. It's very straightforward to me and very clear in many areas that the boys are saying they did not have access. Christine, Nolan's mother, is not saying unequivocally that things were deleted. She was surprised that things were not present. Therefore, she insinuated that things may have been deleted. But she did not really say that the phone was deleted. And the fact that they did not communicate.
That clip gives the audience the defense from the people who were actually there. According to Tatum's account in the supplied interview, the boys said they had Nolan's phone and keys, eventually returned them, and had no reason to access or delete anything. That is their position. But an explanation is not the same thing as independent verification, and that distinction becomes critical when the story reaches Nolan's phone. The phone became one of the most important pieces of the public controversy. Nolan's family recovered the device after locating it through tracking technology. His mother later raised concerns about the apparent lack of messages, photos, or Snapchat activity during the period surrounding the trip. That concern became a much larger public question: is something deleted? But there is a major difference between saying something appears to be missing and proving that somebody removed it. The phone could potentially answer that question. And that is why Nancy Grace repeatedly returned to the device. Where was it? Who had access to it? And had it been forensically examined?
Well, from my understanding, authorities do not have it, and the family have not been cooperating with authorities to give the phone over. According to the testimony or written statement from the lawyer that represents the family, the Nolan Wells family, he had made mention that he's prepared to cooperate, but they have not cooperated yet, which is very interesting to me. You want to find out what happened to your son. You would think you will be doing everything you can to cooperate. I can't judge her. I don't know what's in their mind, but it just seems to be very off-putting for them not to at least give the phone over and do what exactly they told the world they were going to do.
Tatum describes his understanding that Nolan's phone had not yet been handed over to authorities for the forensic extraction being discussed. But this is where we have to be precise. His statement is an account of what he understood at that time. It is not itself a forensic finding. And subsequent reporting showed that the Wells family's attorney said they would work with the prosecutor's office to inspect the phone. So the phone story was not as simple as the phone was hidden, nor was it as simple as nothing happened to the phone. The actual answer required forensic examination. And that brings us to the expert question. A phone can contain far more than the messages visible on its screen. It can contain application databases, cloud synchronization, photos, metadata, deleted file remnants, and records that can help investigators reconstruct activity. That does not mean every deleted message can automatically be recovered. It does not mean a phone can solve an entire death investigation, but it can provide evidence that either supports or challenges parts of a timeline, and that is why the physical device matters.
Data will exist in the cloud if he's syncing to iCloud and third-party applications. However, having physical access to the phone is where the databases exist that will have the truth on deletion. So you really need to get a full file system extraction of his phone as quickly as possible. So if it's not handed over to authorities now, it needs to be, because this was over a month ago now.
Do you have to have the phone to do the extraction? What about the cloud?
Cloud data is different, and there's a lot of information there. There could be unique information in the cloud that's been removed from the phone, if anything was removed, but it's best to have both cloud and the phone.
Barnhart explains the crucial difference between cloud information and the physical phone. Cloud records can preserve one part of a digital story, the device itself can preserve another. And when investigators are specifically trying to determine whether information was deleted, a complete extraction can be especially valuable. So the phone does not automatically prove Warren Hudson lied. It does something more important. It gives investigators a way to test the story. And that is the difference between suspicion and evidence. Hudson's public version of the phone story is straightforward. He says Nolan left the phone on the boat. He says that was not unusual in the environment because people were concerned about getting their phones wet. He says the boys eventually had the phone, and he has denied that anyone manipulated or deleted information from it. There is no public forensic finding establishing that Warren deleted Nolan's data. But there is another question. If the phone was simply left behind, who had it during the critical period, and when was it returned? Those are timeline questions, not accusation.
Nolan's mother, that they had his phone and his keys in their possession. Therefore, she came to get them. They turned them over. They have no access to his codes. They have no reason to delete his phone. They're claiming there's nothing that was deleted. They gave a fair explanation as to why he left the phone on the boat.
Tatum presents the boys' account that they told Christine they had Nolan's phone and keys and later turned them over. If that account is accurate, the phone's history should eventually be capable of being reconstructed. And if the forensic evidence tells a different story, investigators can deal with that too. That is why the word faked has to be handled carefully. Someone can appear nervous. Someone can give an explanation that sounds strange. Someone can remember events differently. None of those things automatically proves fabrication. The evidence has to do the work. And the same principle applies to the boat. The boat sits at the center of the physical timeline. Nolan was on Horn Island. The group eventually left. Nolan did not return with them. And the phone remained connected to the boat. Warren has said the group was dealing with a boat problem and that this was part of the reason they left the island. Reporting on his account says the group was dealing with the boat taking on water, while Warren maintained Nolan had chosen to stay behind. But then another question surfaced. Was the boat thoroughly searched?
The boat, from my understanding, has not been searched, and the cadaver dogs were made available for Benjamin Crump to utilize them to do a search on the boat. They refused.
Crump is not supposed to use the dogs?
According to Tatum's understanding in the supplied transcript, the boat had not been searched with cadaver dogs. That immediately became another point of public argument. Some people interpreted the absence of a search as suspicious. Others argued there was no established evidence of murder requiring such a search. And legally, there was another problem. Who actually had authority to search someone else's property? This is where the emotional debate runs into the legal system. A family can ask for a search. An attorney can request an investigation. A witness can volunteer evidence, but a private citizen does not automatically have the authority to force a forensic search of another person's property.
So Crump or Mrs. or Nolan's mother, they cannot force a cadaver dog or a scent dog search on the Triton, the Triton. Law enforcement needs to bring out a cadaver dog and a scent dog. It's just real simple. It's not hard. Do you agree? They are the ones with authority to do that.
Dubet explains that law enforcement has the authority to conduct searches through the proper legal process. That distinction matters, because saying the boat wasn't searched is not the same as saying the friends refused to let investigators search it, and it certainly does not establish that evidence was hidden there. What matters is what law enforcement actually did, what evidence it considered necessary, and what the ongoing investigation ultimately establishes. That brings us to the most serious question of all. Not the phone, not Warren, not the boat. The death itself. One of the most dangerous shortcuts in a case like this is assuming that the word drowning answers every question. It doesn't. A person can drown accidentally. A person can enter the water after suffering an injury. And as forensic experts explain, drowning does not automatically eliminate every possibility of foul play.
It could be that he did drown, but that does not rule out foul play. It doesn't rule it in. It doesn't rule it out. Explain.
Yeah, you're correct. I mean, drowning, just so you understand, if somebody, say for instance, has a head injury, right, and they fall into a body of water, all right, that can lead to drowning, right?
Morgan's explanation forces us to separate two questions. Did Nolan drown? And what caused Nolan to end up in the water? Those are not necessarily the same question. That distinction is especially important because the cause and manner of Nolan's death remained a major unresolved issue in public reporting. The independent autopsy did not establish a definitive cause while officials continued their investigation. So the medical evidence cannot simply be replaced by internet theories, and neither can Warren's version. Both have to be tested. Now return to the phone. Because if the public question is whether something was deleted, the answer cannot come from a screenshot. It cannot come from a TikTok comment. And it cannot come from whether Warren looks convincing on camera. It has to come from the digital evidence.
Absolutely. So many people don't even realize that on Apple phones, when they go to delete a photo, there's a whole folder in there called deleted photos where they live for at least another 30 days. Your digital trail is so hard to erase. It's why tech experts like myself tell you when you have old tech that you're no longer using, don't immediately recycle it. Don't throw it away. You've got to give it a water bath.
Jordan explains why deleting something from a device does not necessarily mean every digital trace instantly disappears. That is important, but it does not mean investigators can recover everything. It means there may be traces worth examining. And that makes the phone one of the most useful potential tools for separating the competing stories. If the device supports the friend's account, that matters. If it contradicts the account, that matters too. Either way, evidence is more valuable than speculation. Warren's decision to speak publicly changed the nature of the story. Before that, people were largely arguing over secondhand. Then Warren appeared and began giving his version directly. He talked about Nolan, he described their friendship, he explained the boat, he described the last time he says he saw Nolan, he addressed the phone, and he pushed back against accusations circulating online. That does not make him guilty. But once a person publicly explains a timeline, every part of that timeline can be compared with independent evidence. That's how investigative journalism works. Not, he looked nervous, therefore he lied. Not, he cried, therefore he must be innocent. But here's what he said, now what does the evidence say? That is the standard that should apply to everyone in this case. And now the case moves into a process where public opinion becomes less important.
You can, Susan Hendricks.
There is a grand jury. They are investigating. You mentioned Delphi. There's hints of this to me, meaning it's being tried in the court of public opinion. And it's troubling to me that we talk about the mom and we don't know that she didn't hand over the phone. So now she has to go on defense. And as Officer Tatum said, the boat has not been searched by cadaver dogs. So we know that. Grand jury is investigating.
Hendricks says there is a grand jury investigating. That matters because the unanswered questions do not have to be settled by social media. They can be examined through an investigative process. The Wells family has continued to seek answers, while authorities have continued investigating the circumstances surrounding Nolan's death. The family's attorneys have also said they expected the matter to be presented to a grand jury after the investigation was completed. And that changes the questions surrounding Warren Hudson. Because the real issue is no longer, do people believe Warren? The real issue is, can Warren's version survive independent evidence? The title asks whether Warren Hudson faked it, but the evidence currently gives us a more complicated answer. Warren has publicly denied manipulating Nolan's phone. He has defended the group's account of what happened. He has said Nolan chose to stay behind. And he has described the circumstances surrounding the boat and the final time he says he saw his friend. But none of those statements by themselves closes the case, and suspicion is not proof. So the questions remain. The phone. What does the forensic evidence actually show? The boat. Is every relevant part of it properly examined? The autopsy. What ultimately explains Nolan's death? The witnesses, whose timeline can be independently corroborated. The grand jury. What happens when all of that evidence is finally placed together? That is where this story becomes bigger than Warren Hudson. Because Nolan Wells is the person who never made it home. His family is still waiting for answers. And the people who were with him that day still have their explanations tested against evidence that has not yet produced a complete public picture. Maybe Warren was telling the truth. Maybe parts of the story are incomplete. Maybe the missing pieces are buried somewhere in the digital record, the physical evidence, or the testimony of someone who has not yet told the full story. But until that evidence speaks for itself, Warren Hudson remains a man at the center of unanswered questions, not a man proven guilty of causing Nolan Wells' death. And that distinction matters. Because in a case this serious, the truth cannot be decided by who appears the most suspicious. It has to be established by what the evidence can actually prove. And when that evidence finally speaks, there may be nowhere left for any version of the story to hide.